Hello, I'm Ross Dunseath. I'm co-director of the Westphal Neuroimaging Lab in the Division of Perceptual Studies, Department of Psychiatry and Neurobehavioral Sciences at the University of Virginia. I'm going to report today on a study I did entitled Multivariate PK Sensing at the Monroe Institute MC² program. First, a little bit of background about Division of Perceptual Studies, or DOPS. DOPS is engaged in looking for evidence that mind can exist independent of the brain. This includes research on children with past life memories, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, after-death communications, and psychophysiological studies of altered states of consciousness and psi, which is the corner I work in at the Westphal lab. One of the projects I've been working on involves psychokinesis. So we're trying to do high density 128 channel EEG recording or EEG combined with functional near-infrared spectroscopy recordings on participants who are engaged in psychokinesis tasks. The challenge in doing research like that is that we need to have repeated trials in order to get our EEG averaging. So I needed PK sensors that would be able to supply fairly quick results. Our PK data also needs to be sampled with our EEG system, and that involves analog auxiliary inputs with particular bandwidth, about 250 hertz, and a particular voltage range, about 5 volts. We want attractive, well-defined PK targets to make things interesting and perhaps produce better PK results, and a decent signal-to-noise ratio for obvious reasons. And we would also like to have immediate feedback, which, although it may not be necessary for success in PK, certainly makes things more interesting for the PK participant. So I have been building various different sensor arrays over the years to use in our research. Here's an example of one. This picture is taken from the point of view of a participant in our shielded room at DOPS. That box on the right-hand side contains an array of sensors. It's an extraordinarily well-shielded commercial-grade RF box with a cable connector on the left side there that's known as a dog house. The cable running out the left-hand side runs over to our EEG system, which you can't see, it's over to the far left. The monitor and speakers are there for feedback to be supplied to the participant. Another version of this system, there's the sensor box on the very top, fairly long cable going to a amplifier and digitizer, which is connected by fiber optic line to a laptop computer for display and control and feedback purposes. This is the field system that I used, a portable system that I took to the Monroe Institute in order to test various different sensor arrays and also work as a screening effort to see if we could come up with folks who were particularly gifted in PK and would be willing to go submit themselves to high density EEG recordings in our lab. Inside that sensor box, the particular array setup that I used in the study I'm reporting on today is in this picture. So on the lower left-hand corner, you see a stack of metal boxes. Those have the PK sensors in them. On the very top, the silver box is a Geiger counter. The silver box in the center is a battery box, and the box on the right is a 3-axis magnetometer. This is basically a double shielded system. It's at least 120 dB of RF shielding and fairly good shielding all the way down into low frequency ranges. Now inside the smaller PK sensor boxes are some electronics and glass cubes. These glass cubes are either plexiglass or quartz. These were the targets. So they're 1/2 inch cubes I thought they would be attractive targets for people, especially the quartz sensors. People like quartz. They get excited when they hear about quartz crystals. So here we have quartz crystals are the target. These cubes have electrodes. It's hard to see from this picture, but they're metallic electrodes on either side. The glass cubes are essentially dielectrics, acting as insulators for the actual sensor, which is the metal electrode. These electrodes are connected into very high impedance integrated circuit amplifiers, and there's a couple stages of amplification and filtering that you can see, and then the wires on the bottom are individual signal lines going out. Essentially, this is what's known as an air ionization chamber. These sensors are picking up charge, and I will explain a little bit more about what's going on with that. What the sensors, as I said, to pick up charge, well, the charge appears as random events. Now, this is a display from our real-time system. It's somewhat filtered. It's high-pass filtered primarily, so you get this clear-cut pulse image appearing, and these pulses have a timing to them. They have a magnitude to them. They also have a polarity, although this turns out to not be important. And they have if you look carefully, they have a slope on the leading edge. So for example, that first pulse on the left has got a very sharp downward slope, whereas if you look at the bottom trace, the one pulse that's appearing there has a very shallow slope. So we have at least three variables right here. We've got timing of events, we've got magnitudes, and we've got slopes, which I also call velocities. A little more detail about the event signal. Now, this is the full bandwidth going down as close as we can get to DC on a capacitively coupled high impedance Coulomb meter, which is essentially what the system is. What you see there is what looks like pretty much a step function. This is a single event that occurred, a pretty typical one. It has what looks like basically charge that's been accumulated on the electrode. Has a magnitude, has a slope, and has a time. You can see that triangle right next to the pulse there, the step function. That is the result of the output from an automated scoring routine that we wrote. So as you can see from the previous chart, it's pretty easy to see where these events occur, and they are amenable to automated scoring. Now the field system, we're not using that automated scoring. That's post-processing. However, in the field system, we can do a simple RMS on average on the amplitudes and get a number. So for example, on this display, if you look in the upper left-hand corner and see 1974, that is a running average of these multiple channels, all added up and updated every 5 seconds. That's the number that we ask participants to make go up. So in the protocol that I'm about to describe to you, participants were given instructions that the cubes inside that shielded box were the target, and their task was to make that number go up. We carefully timed the trials, and in order to get the timing of when the trials started, that second window, that one that says 5:31 is an elapsed seconds indicator from the beginning of the recording. So we could record when the trials were occurring. And then the next window down, the one that says 49, was a resettable timer to time individual trials. So in essence, the protocol went like this. Before any PK attempt, we recorded a baseline. And the reason for recording the baseline, and I just realized I have to go back to this chart right here to explain. As I mentioned, we were picking up charge. So the typical measured charge is 2,000 picocoulombs. It just so happens that a 1 MeV beta particle releases approximately 3,000 picocoulombs of charge in an air ionization chamber. Where is this charge coming from? It's caused by as I mentioned, a beta particle zipping through air, causing ionization of air molecules. So what happens is, generally speaking, muons coming from cosmic rays making it to the surface of the Earth, because they're going at almost the speed of light, so they experience time dilation. They only live for 3 microseconds. Because they're going so fast, they can make it all the way to the surface of the Earth. And as they zip by, they ionize little bits of air, and our detectors are picking up that ionization. We also verified that this is going on through several other means, including taking the system up to the top of Pikes Peak and seeing that the event counts increased in proportion as expected. Interestingly enough, this is all based on very early particle research of physics around the turn of the 20th century. Began the whole field of particle physics, in fact, high altitude air ionization experiments. Anyway, so as I was mentioning, we carefully take baselines for each PK event or trial in order to compensate for any natural variation in background muon rates. So as I said, muons are coming from cosmic rays. There's going to be some variation, but so before each trial, we get that baseline, the control period. The MC² PK study, let me tell you a little bit about the Monroe Institute. It's here in Central Virginia, just south of Charlottesville, on an incredibly beautiful campus. It's been around for 50 years, just about the same amount of time as DOPS has been in existence. It was founded by Robert Monroe, who was famous, of course, for out-of-body adventures. Monroe Institute runs several different types of week-long residential programs. They also have online programs now, all oriented towards consciousness exploration. This particular program is called MC². It's run by Joe Gallenberger, who very graciously allowed me to bring my equipment down to the program 1 day a week during the program in the evening, and allow folks to have at it. It was actually turned out to be a lot of fun. On the average, there are 20 participants per program. This particular study went on across 10 sessions from 2013 through 2016. We had 112 different participants in, attempting PK in the study, 203 trials total. Typical trial length was 120 seconds long. Some of them were a little bit shorter, some a little bit longer, but most of them were around 120 seconds. And that was something that I had come down to learn. What was the optimal amount of time to run a PK trial using systems like this? 120 seconds. It's a little bit long for EEG research, but in MC², we would have groups that were gathered together with this box in the center of the room as the target. We would convene the group effort, generally speaking, with some description by me as to what this box and the sensors were all about. And then we might run 3 or 4 attempts with the whole group focusing on the box, and then break down into allowing individuals to attempt one at a time. The atmosphere was casual. Part of the reason that I've only got 10 sessions from 2013 through 2016 was that this was experimental science. So before 2013, I was messing around with the sensors a lot. Between 2013 and 2016, we had a very stable sensor array. We had a stable protocol. After 2016, we started drifting into a new protocol. So this is a stable protocol, and I had to, of course, get all the data. So in the experiment, as I was mentioning, we would have either groups or individuals attempting. There are various different categories for what they were doing. I would record the times manually from that screen I was showing you, what the type of trial was, and then after the experiment, put this all in the Excel database, which we ended up with 447 entries for this experiment. So what were the results from that? Just looking at event counts only, rest control period versus PK trials, we see that the event rate is 0.8 for the control period. This event rate is essentially number of events that occur per 8-second record. 0.8 for control, about 0.86 for PK. The 95% confidence intervals do overlap a little bit, but the PK confidence interval does not make it down to the mean of the control, which tends to suggest a probability value of somewhere between 0.1 and 0.5. And indeed, a bootstrap resampled t-test gives a p-value of 0.02 for the significance of the difference. Notice the event rate is greater for PK, which corresponds to the directions or the request we had of the participant, which is to make the number go up. If the number's going up, you're getting more events. The effect size of the experiment was 0.07. Typical PK experiment effect size is around 0.05. So that's pretty good. Power 0.06, which is a little bit low, but it is what it is. Now, event counts, as I showed you earlier, are not the only information that can be derived from the system. We can also get magnitudes and velocities. And when we do that and put together a system, first of all, we have to consider, are these three variables independent? And the answer is no, they're not. The correlated correlation coefficients running from around 0.6 or slightly less to at most 0.8, which means the system's a perfect candidate for using MANOVA, multivariate analysis of variance. And when we pull together the data in the system and run a MANOVA, we come up with a p-value of 0.009 for the significance of PK over control periods. So adding more information from that system seems to give us a better PK result. Interestingly enough, if you look at the top box, the univariate F-tests, that first one, MC event, those are the event counts. The p-value estimate from MANOVA for that individual variable is 0.0166, which is pretty close to 0.02, which I got just running the t-test, as you saw previous. So that, conveys a sense of confidence that these things are fairly accurate. The next variable down, MC mat, that's a magnitude. It's not quite significant. It's getting close, but it's not there. But the next variable down, velocity, MCVET, has a p-value of 0.006, which I found pretty interesting. It's almost as if the velocity is the most important variable of the three. But nonetheless, when you put them all together as a system, we're getting a pretty good p-value for this experiment. At this point, one would ask, is there, I should mention one other thing. Again, I had to do bootstrap resampling for this because none of these variables are normally distributed. This was fairly well behaved and converged at 2400 resamples. So that made me feel pretty confident in the accuracy of this as well. So the next question is, can we extract even more information out of this system? And the answer is yes. So another variable would be what's known as event clusters. This is looking at the time interval between events. If events start coming too close together, where you see a bunch of events all piling up very close together. It's what's known in cosmic ray research as a cluster. And taking a cue from cosmic ray cluster analysis, the first thing we have to understand here is if the time difference in arrival for events is exponentially distributed. The answer is yes for our data. So knowing that, we can proceed and calculate a scan statistic for every cluster that we identify. Once that cluster scan statistic is in, we have it multiplied times the total number of clusters in the data. And if that number comes out to be less than 0.01, the cluster is considered significant. So how many clusters and significant clusters did we get in this experiment? The answer is, well, the cluster counts were much lower than event counts. Makes sense. Most clusters have only 2 events. So what happens is you get 2 events very close together. It's not really an expected occurrence. Now here's the thing that was interesting about this. The rest clusters are all 2 eventers. There were a total of 16 of them in this data. The PK clusters had 20, but the PK clusters also have multiple events, ranging from 5 to 12 events in the cluster. So I came up with a weighted cluster score, which is basically multiplying each cluster by its number of events and adding them up. And for rest, or the control periods, we get a value of 32, and for PK a value of 70. The takeaway from that is clusters are probably not going to be something you can use all the time for feedback or trials or anything else, but when they appear, they probably indicate truly a PK event has occurred here. It's either that or the muons have gone nuts. But it's like an asterisk, I think, in the data. Okay, so what does all this mean? Well, first of all, the simplest interpretation of this is that human intention can influence the trajectory of high energy particles, such as muons. And muons are basically heavy electrons. And there is also prior evidence in the literature. For example, Radin in 1993 in Subtle Energies published a study using a Geiger counter and showed that apparently human intention can affect the count rates in the Geiger counter from counting background radiation. Sue Bemford et al. In a study I really like, in 1999, Alternative Therapies in Health and Medicine, they found, using a different way to measure background radiation, that when patients were undergoing energy medicine treatments, the radiation level background went down, significantly down. It was almost as if the energy healer was forming a shield around them as they worked on them. Another example of human intention in influencing high energy particles is Jin Yan et al. 2002 in the JSE. Master, I hope I'm saying this right, Jin Yan was able to influence several different types of dosimeters and other devices measuring various types of nuclear radiation or background radiation, close by or at a distance. Very impressive demonstration of this. So, can we differentiate what's going on here from, say, where the locus of PK is in the system? One could perhaps surmise that the PK occurred in the electronics. I say no, because we have these identifiable signals. And the simplest answer is that the trajectories of muons are being influenced by human intention. Also, this is an example, I think, of goal-oriented PK. The instructions given to the participants were simply, you've got quartz cubes or plexiglass cubes, make the number go up. And that is what they did. And to further reinforce that, if you recall, I mentioned there was a Geiger counter in that sensor box. That was one of the signals we were Measuring the Geiger counter was not significant in this experiment, not even close. The participants were not told about the Geiger counter. It was not a target on their radar screen. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.